So it's not like we approach Darling and the Franxx with a theme or message to say. How you interpret it is up to you. That's Atsushi Nishigori, series director, writer, animator, and a whole lot else on Darling and the Franxx. It came in response to a question at this year's Crunchyroll Expo on the handling of gender and sexuality. Themes very much at the forefront of one of 2018's most watched series. Themes apparently made up as the creative staff went along, which, as any creator will tell you, is odd. Sure, new ideas and areas to explore crop up along the way, but undoubtedly there's a core conceit sparking it all. There had to have been with FranXX, right? Nishigori and his team had some sort of notion as to what they wanted to craft. If not sexuality and gender, then what? And now it's all making a whole lot of sense, months later, as to why I had one prevailing thought: that Darling and the FranXX has nothing to say. I am of course one of many who hold Studio Trigger in high regard, maybe even a little higher than most, considering even one of their least popular shows, Kiznaiver, is something I quite enjoy. Plus my channel has grown on the back of Little Witch Academia. My opinion of A1 Pictures is mixed, which isn't a unique take either. It would be easy to say, as many have, that the downfall of FranXX is on the hands of A1, that everything right can be attributed to the flawless Trigger. And all that went wrong must be due to the folks who made Sword Art Online and Era Manga Sensei. Not only does that ignore the fluid nature of studio structure, but it's also willfully ignorant. In a Reddit AMA back in April, Trigger had this to say about the creative process of FranXX. For Darling, Trigger was mainly in charge of concept planning and development. On the other hand, A1's got the capacity to produce multiple titles throughout the year. And they're also known for their quality, so we got a lot to learn from them when it comes to actual production. Additionally, Nishigori is a Trigger man. He came up through Gainax with series like Gurren Lagann, Fully Cooley, and Panty and Stocking. He's a relatively new lead man though, having only ever been tasked with key writing and directing roles on one prior series, that being Idolmaster. I can't personally speak to the quality of it, but I feel comfortable in saying it's an entirely different beast. This lack of writing prowess permeates throughout much of the staff taking lead roles on writing and directing. Assistant director Toshifumi Akai, who had practically no credits as a writer or episode director prior to this. Co-writer Naotaka Hayashi, meanwhile, is mostly credited as a scenario supervisor in the mixed bag, if I'm being nice, science adventure anime adaptations. The mark of any good Trigger production comes in its visuals though. Direction, shot composition, character design, and animation are all areas they consistently succeed in. Undoubtedly, there are some neat tricks on display. The cinematic letterboxing during the more dramatic moments is one example. It focuses the viewer's attention to specific spots on the screen, cutting out superfluous background details in favor of presenting what is most important up front. Similarly, lighting plays a big role, such as it does in the well-received episode 13, The Beast and the Prince. The shot of a modern hero and a young Zero-Two mostly divided by sunlight pouring into an old science facility. I say mostly because Zero-Two's head is partially in the light, symbolizing the growing connection the two will form. Hero being in the light with a face slapped full of an epiphany brought on by the recollection of his past, and Zero-Two head down in the shadows, fearful of having Hero see who she really is. Throughout the series and in prior outings, static glitches interrupt scenes that drag painful memories to the surface. It's a simple and common effect, but one that distinctly lets the audience know something isn't right. Character design is an area where, well, there are bright spots, but overall it doesn't much compare to the usual Trigger offerings. Some of the telltale markings exist: the red, orange, and blue accents, stylization of the see-through hair, and the rounded versus sharp edge of said hair. The pencil-thin and often loose line work that makes a Trigger show stand out at first blush. Zero-Two is the most pronounced design of them all. Makes sense given the rigid structure of human culture and what Zero-Two represents as a disruptor. But Hiro, Kokoro, Goro, Ichigo, and so on lack that extra oomph. They look like the background characters in any other Trigger show, who exist to give the world a sense of style, but aren't so pronounced that they overshadow the main cast. Part of this can be attributed to the school uniform that may have narrative purpose but has an overlooked artistic presence. To bring up Kill la Kill, it too predominantly takes place on school grounds and involves school children. The themes of the world involve the suppression of individuality of anyone not deemed special by the powers that be. But whereas the cast of FranXX wear the same plain uniforms that the background characters would wear, Ryoko, Mako, and all the starred students of Kill la Kill have unique outfits. FranXX's implementation strikes me as an effect of not thinking ahead. Sure, it has narrative purpose, but that falls to the wayside when your cast looks homogenous as a result. It could have been interesting to see some of their outfits change as the individual personalities come forward. I mean, Squad 13 is apparently special and more reliant on individualism than any other unit. We get that in their design of their mechs, but not in the clothes they choose, the way they style their hair, or how they decorate their dorms. So I casually point back to that quote from Nishigori that I opened with. One of the great strengths of anime is the advantage of a shorter and tighter narrative, how that allows writers to plan out 12 or 24 episodes well before the series ends. Unlike in Western television where shows are written over the course of several years, handed off between writers, having demands of showrunners and channel owners change along the way. This is seen in how often American shows will fall from grace over the course of their elongated runs. The Walking Dead, Dexter, That 70s Show, Scrubs, The Office, Homeland, True Blood, The Simpsons, Weeds, X-Files, Lost, and seemingly Game of Thrones, if it doesn't get its act together. Some of the most well-regarded and successful series in the last couple decades that often get recommended but come with a caveat of it gets bad. From here on, I'm going to be talking openly about plot spoilers. You've been warned, though I don't really think Darling in the Franxx spoilers aren't rather obvious or impactful. Among the majority of anime consuming audience, the show was well received through its first dozen or so episodes. Reading through the weekly reaction posts on Reddit will confirm this. The aforementioned episode 13 being highly regarded, but after that, enjoyment slowly sputtered out towards a major attitude shift around episode 19. Meanwhile, episode 14 that brought the love triangle of Hiro, 02, and Ichigo back into the forefront in some tiresome ways, had a less than savory reaction. Unfortunately, people proved to be perpetually shitty thanks to the death threats sent to members of the FranXX staff's personal Twitter accounts. I think much of this falloff can be attributed to the tonal deviation. As silly as doggy-style pairing to power mechs is, the series doesn't go full trigger until very late. In fact, I'd say a whole lot of it is rather serious melodrama delivered in a widely appealing A1 Pictures kind of way. The protagonist is the person the male otaku viewership wish they were / see themselves as. Talented, well-liked, and being held back from their full potential due to outside forces and internal trauma that serves to make them more deep. Said viewer insert is then sandwiched between good girl childhood friend love interest and manic pixie dream girl. Not that this exact dynamic isn't present in other Trigger shows, I mean, Kiznaiver has it. Then again, it's written by Mari Okada, who isn't generally seen as a Trigger mainstay and is best known for her widely appealing, emotionally sweeping romances. Kiznaiver, unlike FranXX, doesn't centralize its narrative on such. The dynamic between Hiro, 02, and Ichigo repeats itself ad nauseum until the final conflict. Much of what makes Kill la Kill or Little Witch Academia some of my favorite anime is worn on their respective sleeves. They're far from subtle about much of their messaging, but reward those who want to look deeper. FranXX is only the former, and well, it unsurprisingly has not much to say. Again, that Nishigori quote. The goals here are not all that interesting. It's predominantly teens going through puberty and coming to grips with their sexuality in a really basic, chaste, but sometimes creepy way. You know, like how so much of romantic anime with a large male demographic will sexualize their female cast, make their boys really prude in a way that feels almost contradictory towards the fan service aspects, and just have straight up ass and tit shots of young girls for the audience's stroking pleasure. Boys are meant to be relatable to the audience of young males that maybe aren't the most outgoing. Then the girls are all cute in the standard 5 to 4 ways, are allowed to be sexualized but are rarely sexual. But when they are, it's distinctly in service of a male audience. It's just all kind of tiresome. I don't need the panty pull-up shot that happens in episode 2. I don't need the scene where the clothes melting ooze seeps into the cockpits and somehow only leaks onto the girls. I'm genuinely confused how these kids who have been sheltered by an authoritarian government their whole lives that keeps all information about sexuality, puberty, reproduction, and so on tucked far away from them to the point they don't know what kissing is. Yet somehow they understand the concept of a pervert. That brief period where the adults disappear and leave the kids to fend for themselves, yup, that's the kids needing to learn to fly from the nest. How the discussion of atheism and transhumanism in flashbacks to Dr. Frank's younger days sprouts a neckbeard and spontaneous fedora, only to completely abandon all of that in favor of, it was the aliens all along. Yes, the Calaxosaurs were actually the good guys and the authoritarian government was being controlled by aliens determined to destroy Earth. What is of greatest concern though is the confused perspective on social topics. I'm saying this as someone who isn't hit on a personal level by these aspects, but nevertheless I was left befuddled. There is a lesbian couple, but they're background dressing. There are characters who can perform the male or female mecha roles, but then those same characters are mouthpieces for the authoritarian government. The same ones trying to assimilate humanity into the hive consciousness of Verm. As a result, the notion of gender becomes unnecessary along with having children, making the message that traditional mindsets towards gender and procreation are necessary for humankind. Nishigori even confirms this mindset in the answer I pulled for the opening quote. I get the sense that he thinks he was on some socially woke shit, but really comes off as woefully undereducated. Maybe he just wasn't prepared for such a question. Apparently, more hot button inquiries are vetted out by those controlling interviews when it comes to anime in an environment the publisher can control, but that's probably being far too forgiving. It's around the reveal of Ape's true identity that many of the show's most ardent defenders began to doubt, but honestly, this is where it actually evolves into being more truly Trigger than it ever was before. This, of course, is the end result of Zero Two's character arc. She figures out she can actually be a giant mecha girl in space, and why the hell are people disappointed by this? Well, it's because prior FranXX was Trigger by way of A1. Not saying A1 is bad, but when you look at each studio and see which has more widely appealing hits that reach a more mainstream audience, well, it's the people that made Sword Art Online. Then all of a sudden Gurren Lagann and Evangelion references start to manifest into their final form. But that's not what viewers grew to expect over the course of 24 episodes, roughly 6 months, and so FranXX went from mainstream hit to mainstream mess. This isn't helped by the structure of the final act. The fake-out finale is a bit much and the show should have wrapped up that episode or the next. Instead, it just drags out the epilogue over the course of 3 episodes, having nothing new to say. A story beat added not because of a potential new perspective. The inability to know when to say enough is enough, well, that's just another reason to be concerned about Nishigori's skill as a director and as a writer. Darling in the Franxx isn't a particularly bad show, it's fine. Just fine. Sure, disappointing if you look at the studios behind it, but maybe people will stop attaching so much hype on studios and more on the actual names working their asses off for our enjoyment. Because Atsushi Nishigori, he's a good animator. That's all his career has proven. Maybe he's not a good writer. Maybe he was juggling too much. I hope he proves me wrong someday. However, it was the lack of direction from its series creator and director which led to Darling in the Franxx lacking direction. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos from me about terrible anime, or maybe some good anime too, be sure to donate to my Patreon. It's the best way to support this channel, along with subscribing, liking, all that usual YouTube nonsense.